morning, everybody. I've just finished my coffee. At some point, the dogs and everybody else will be getting back because they've been out training this morning. So if we get an interruption, that's why. Let's work out how to that's lovely. So I've managed to schedule the live stream for the to go up on Instagram, and I'm now going, how do we make this work? No, not that, because I scheduled it. Happening now. Oh, I'm so good at this. Start. There we go. Oh, I love technology, and I love working out how to do everything. Hello on Instagram if anybody's watching, and sorry for anybody on YouTube. That was me just trying to work out how to get both of these working at the same time, which is never the easiest of jobs. We're going to dye the September Seasonal Changes pack with the colourway that everybody chose. It was really close between Reed Bed and the Heather Hillside one. But Reed Bed was the one that won, which is this colour palette. So it's not so on an angle. So we're quite pastel-y this month, which will be kind of a nice change because the past 2 months we did a sort of wheat field with dark skies, so lots of contrasting blues and yellows, and then the one that was for August was the sunflower one, which has got really vibrant greens and glowing yellows. So this one's going to be something a little bit different for us to do, but always a bit of a challenge because making pastels consistent can be really hard because the slightest change in the quantity of dye and all of a sudden you can have quite a visually different looking colour. But we're going to give it a go. So we're going to start off with the colour at the bottom, which is the darkest grey. Now tonally this is the darkest colour in this pack, so if you sort of half squint your eyes, then this dark grey at the very bottom here, that's the colour that's going to look visually strongest. So it's the colour that we need to make the it needs to have the most amount of dye in it. So I'm actually going to increase the intensity a little bit from what this colour swatch is, just because it's going to make for a more successful pack in terms of when somebody buys it and comes to use it. If everything's the same tonal value, it makes it really difficult to use it for things like colour work and stripes and things like that, because everything just mixes all into one sort of visually unapparent mess. I'm going to use my grey dye here because I know that this grey dye has got quite a bluish undertone. It's going to sit really well with that kind of dark watery colour at the bottom there, but I'm not going to make it as dark as I sometimes do when I'm mixing the packs. So we're just going to use, that's 50 millilitres of dye in there. Let me write this down. So these always get written down so that I can dye them again throughout the rest of the month. And it means that I have got a recipe, but there's only ever packs from the same dye lot listed at the same time. So sort of, because even though I've got a recipe, there will be a little bit of variation. So let's just add some water into that because we'll need to add some liquid in order to spread that dye around the fibre, and we will just test that out. So very quick and easy test just on it's a scrappy piece of kitchen roll. So that's a grey with some blue undertones, and I'm not going to do anything else to that. I'm not going to mess around with it anymore because quite a few of the other colours are going to need me to do significantly more experimentation. Right, that's going to one side so I don't mix it up. The next colour up, so I think I'm going to work from this colour palette. I'm going to work from the bottom upwards. So I've started with this dark grey. But let's turn it that way because that way. So I started with this darkest grey. We're going to go for the silvery shade coming next. Now that silver shade, it's quite a hard one to dye. It's not going to need very much dye at all. And I think I've got two choices to make those neutral greys. I've either got the grey dye that I've just used, but I know when we dilute that down, it produces something that is much bluer than I want. And I've got a black dye, which has very purple undertones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the black dye with purple undertones, and then I'm going to use a little bit of colour theory and go the opposite of purple on the colour wheel is yellow. So if I take a tiny amount of my black dye with purple undertones and put in a tiny amount of a yellow dye, that's going to neutralise out some of the purple undertones and hopefully get closer to giving me a nice neutral silver grey. So let's pull off some of this dye here, and we'll want some of this black for later colours anyway. And we'll pull off some of that one. Right, this wants to be really, really pale, so we're going to use next to no dye. So I'm going to measure out 2 millilitres of dye for that, and then let's have one of that, which is about the smallest amount that I can measure out. Let's write that down before I forget in a handwriting to make sure that I can actually read it again. And we'll take a look at this. Now this might end up being a little bit green, but sometimes we kind of have to go with what we can get. So that is the silvery colour that I've just mixed. So you can see how that's the blue toned grey that I have as a pure grey dye. And then above it, we've got the grey that I've tried to mix as a slightly more silver toned colour. That's going to be as pale as we need. It looks darker on here because it's wet, which always makes colours look much darker than they are. It's a little bit greeny toned, but without being able to. The issue with only dyeing 100 grams of fibre in one go is that when you want to make things really fine adjustments to the colour, the smallest I can measure out is 1 millilitre of dye. So therefore, there's no point in trying to go for half a millilitre of dye because that's not going to be replicable. Right. Base dyes and then making the other colours. So yes, people making. I will try and keep track of comments on Instagram and also up on YouTube. But sometimes I'm kind of trying to do 6 things at once, so it doesn't always work. So if I don't answer it, it's not that I'm being rude and don't want to. It might be that you've just not seen it as somebody else has joined. So don't be afraid to either ask a question or just repeat yourself. Okay. And I say, if you ever want to watch it back, I always save them as a post on Instagram. Well, I did last month. I'll do the same this month. And it also gets saved up on YouTube. So if you're on Instagram and going, I can't quite see enough detail, it's because the format has to be that way. Whereas on YouTube, I can put the format landscape, and it's sometimes a bit easier to see the chaos that's generally going on here. Right. Enough technical stuff. Let's dye our next colour. So we're moving on to the next one up, which is this yellow shade here. And you'll notice so far that we've managed to go through and get these done quite quickly. And that's kind of for a combination of reasons. And one of them is that I do this a lot. So we've been doing seasonal changes packs for ages now, but I'm full-time professional dyer. It's what I do. I know my dyes very well. I know how they mix together very well. So I'm pretty good at kind of working out roughly what sort of intensity of colour I want to get. I also don't ever claim that I'm going to make a slavish copy of the colours in this palette. I'm not interested in doing that because it doesn't produce a successful set of colours in terms of fibre quite a lot of the time. I aim to make something that's kind of inspired by and has a feeling of this, rather than this is an absolute exact Pantone match, and if you were to scan them, they would be the same colour. So I've just pulled off 50 millilitres of a warmer. My handwriting's dreadful today. Let's rewrite that so I can actually read it. So I've got two different yellows on the go. One is a very lemony yellow and one's a much richer golden yellow. So in order to make this golden yellow in here, we need to do a more golden yellow colour here. I could make this lemon toned one warmer, but this has quite a nice, this colour has a richness and intensity. Let me show you the difference between the two. So that's my golden yellow. And that's my lemon yellow. Now I suspect Instagram will see this better because the quality of the camera is better because on my phone. That's the golden yellow and that's a more lemon yellow. So you can see how tonally they're just subtly different. So I'm going to squeeze around there. So the top one was the more golden coloured yellow and the bottom one is the lemony colour. So because they're different, it's easy to just tweak them in slightly different ways to end up with slightly different tonal colours. Now that yellow by itself is far too harsh and intense to give us this colour here. And you'll note that I've used roughly so far the same amount of dye as I put in the grey. But because yellow is quite a visually weak colour, it's not going to be as strong. It's not going to have the same intensity as the grey shade did. So I'm not worried about the fact that I'd said this grey was going to be the darkest colour, and then I've used the same amount of dye for the yellow, because yellow doesn't have as much visual intensity. Yellow always looks paler when you use the same amount of dye. And some people do. Some people like mix their yellow dyes to be stronger or anything else, so that they can use the same amount of dye and have it be the same strength. I don't do that. I just know that the yellow's paler and I know that I need to use more of it if it's going to be as visually intense as the other colours. Anyway, so that's our daffodil, but we want to add some other colours into it to make it slightly more golden. And there's two things that we can use for that. So there's this colour from up here, which is, it's called Scarlet, but in reality it's just kind of like a really vibrant, intense orange colour. And let me go back to the picture and work out. So that yellow, what I don't want to do is I don't want to make it too close to the shade of orange here. So I'm going to go for putting more brown in it than orange, because that then gives me some options to play around with these oranges and pink colours. So I've got 50 of the daffodil. Let's have 5 of the scarlet. So that will have just already shifted the colour ever so slightly. I'll show you where we've gone with that. So you can now see we've already got something that's a lot more warm in tone. It don't stay quite as orange as that once it's on the fibre, and when it dries in a dry colour it will be less orange than that. And let's start with 5 brown, because you can always add dye, can't take it away. Let's see where we've ended up. So that's where we've ended up. Now that looks like it's going to be really, really far too dark. I don't think that is going to be as dark. Once it's on the fibre, spread out a little bit more. And we've also let the fibre dry, because colours always get paler when it's dried. That's going to be round about the right ballpark. By putting the brown in, we've just knocked back that slightly orangey shade. So that's going to be about right for us, I think. And the other thing to bear in mind is that if they end up being not right when I sort of finish looking at them and I look at them dry and I hang them up, I sort of go, hang on a minute, let's redo that. And there's been a few times when I've just gone, no, this colour's not right. It doesn't work for what we want. So we have done the 2 greys and the yellow. We've now got kind of an apricot colour and a mauvey lilac colour left to do. So this apricot here apricot's basically very, very pale orange. And what I will probably do is I'll probably take this insanely bright orange colour. Show you what that is. So that's the orange that I've just been putting into the yellow. And that's far too bright for what we actually want here. It's really, really sort of acidic-y kind of colour. And this colour on here is much, much softer. So what I shall do is I'll take a tiny amount of that orange and then I'll just tone it down ever so slightly with a little bit of brown. So, cut off your big weed. I've cut off my big weed. Hello, mother. So, I just did want to, hey? So I said she's just come back from dog training, returning the stool, step still. She's off. Right, interruption over. No, they can't see you because the cameras are pointing this way. Okay. So if she borrowed one of my step stools to take dog training for Nellie's been working on doing some of the like the heel work style things. Anyway, don't need to know that, but they've just come back from being out for the morning, and of course didn't know that I was filming today. So we've got 5 millilitres of scarlet. Concentrate and get back on track. We're going to add a tiny bit of the brown to it, just to take that real acidy kind of colour. And I am going to put a little bit of water in before I test it out, because I want to see whether we are in the right vibes. So can you see? That was the original orange, that colour there. And then just by putting a little bit of brown in it, we've gone from being really, really acidic and not the sort of soft vibes that we're into for this colour palette. And we've just taken the colours into being a little bit softer. 5 scarlet, 1 brown. So that's kind of looking, we were aiming for that orange there, trying to do things in reverse, that kind of orange tone, and we've sort of ended up in the right ballpark for that. So I'm going to leave that one there, and then our next colour, which is the final one to dye, move that up to there, is this soft mauvey colour. Now I've got a pre-mixed purple up there, which I really like the colour of. I'd stopped using it for ages, and then remember sort of because I'd run out of it and it was out of stock, and then sort of I suddenly went, oh, I remembered that dye I used to use loads and I really like. So we're going to use that as our starting point, but I think it's going to be a little bit too cool tone for what we want. So let me just see. Oh, why have I put water in there? I've just done something silly. Right, so that purple there in the middle, there we go. That's the colour that I was just saying I really like, but it's not quite right for this. So it's a little bit too, if we hold it up next to there, it's a little bit too blue toned. We hold it, so there we go. Get the angle right, so the reflection. So we've got a purple there that we were using, looking at that purple there. So trying to show both screens, but I've just pulled that off and then put water in it, which means I don't know how much dye there is in there. So I'll put that to one side and I'll use it again later, because I don't need as much dye as 25 millilitres, which is what that pump dispenser gives me. Let's go for 10 of that dye. And then if we look at this colour here, we need to make it slightly pinker. So it's not quite as blue toned as that purple is by itself. So I need, let's have a look. What are you? You're black. You won't work. None of those colours I've already got are going to be right. Let's put you into there. no matter how many containers you have, it's never quite as many as you need. Now I've got two choices for making this pinker. I could either use a really warm tone like fire engine red, or I've also got a magenta quite type colour, which is a lovely, lovely hot pink, but it's a pain in the arse to use for these repeat recipes because it's a dye that settles and it makes it really, really hard work to use for repeat recipes, because if it's not perfectly mixed, when I come to use it the next time, if it doesn't completely match what I was using last time, particularly with these pale colours, it can be a little bit of a pain. But what I have got as well is the one that I'm going to use, which is a real, it's like a fluorescent pink colour. So you can probably see on the side of the jar there just how vibrant a colour this one is. Now, just by itself into that purple, that's not going to be right. But I think if I use that combination of this hot pink and some brown, we will probably be right. So let's go for, start off with one and one. So we've got one of each. Just dilute it a little bit and you'll be able to see how this has shifted the colour palette. This kitchen roll is getting really full today. On there. So I have put some that hot pink and the brown in there. So that's our original purple. That's with the hot pink and the brown. That's the original colour, and that's the hot pink and the brown. So we've just shifted it slightly, but it's still not quite pinky toned enough. So we're going to put another one in. So somebody's just asking on Instagram about why not use the fire engine red for this. And it might have been that would work, but when I look at this colour, to me, I see it's actually not, it's very pinky coloured. And I know that when I put that fire engine red in with that purple, it makes it it's sort of quite a sludgy coloured brown. So we've just added one more bit of pink in. And we've just slowly, so we've got original one, that's the one that we did just, and then we've just made it ever so slightly more pink in colour, which is that one there. So I will grab myself a fresh picture kitchen roll so that you can see all of these in one go, because I'm aware that whilst I understand what's going on there, nobody else probably does. So we have got that as our purple, that as our orange, oh, 2 drips of the golden yellow. Oh, that was dirty clearly because we've just ended up with not the silvery colour. And that's our dark shade there. So that's the colour palette we've ended up with. So we've got the purples, the golds, ignore that one because that had some yellow in it. And then we've got that purple down there. The yellow might be too intense, but what I'll probably do is dye it. Now I've mixed it up, and I'll take a look at it and decide whether I need to dye another 100 grams later on. That's slightly paler, because I'm just a little bit concerned with how vibrant this yellow is in comparison to everything else. But it might be that I think that it works. But as I've mixed the dye up, I don't want to mess about, and I'll use it, see whether it's right, and if not, there'll be another one. So we're now ready to start putting dye onto our fibre. Those of you who have seen this lots before will probably go, okay, don't need to watch anymore. And if you need to disappear, that's fine. I will not be offended. But I'm now going to start adding these dyes onto our fibre. The fibre went into soak last night. So it was all weighed out. So when I dyed the seasonal changes packs, squeeze out all the water. When I dye the seasonal changes packs, I dye 100 grams of each colour in one go and then split it all up, so that you've got the option of having just 20 grams of each colour, or you can buy multiples to kind of get as much as you want. But as I said, if it's in the shop at the same time, then that means it's all come from the same dye lot, so to speak. So the fibre went into soak. It's Cambrian wool, which is the Welsh Mountain Cross with Blue-Faced Leicester. It's got a lovely long staple. It's got a nice open crimp. It works well for woolen and worsted spinning, and it dyes really nicely. And we're just going to dye these. I refer to them as being like semi-solid colours. So it's where I try to get the colour spread out nice and evenly. But because we're doing this using a low water method, because that's the way that keeps the fibre in the best possible condition, there's always going to be some variation in intensity. There's always going to be little bits that are darker, little bits that are lighter. So you end up with a yarn that sort of has a little bit of movement into it. Okay. So yeah, so somebody's just said they're watching whilst drum carding. And yeah, so these packs are really nice for building up like a colour palette for working with on a drum carder. So because you can sort of mix the colours with lots of other things. So that's just had citric acid on. So the dyes that I use are called acid dyes. They're called acid dyes because the conditions to get the dye to bond onto the fibre need to be slightly acidic. So, and to do that, we use citric acid. Citric acid is basically, it's the thing that makes lemon juice taste sour. So it's pretty harmless stuff. Nice thing about it in comparison to vinegar is it doesn't smell, which I quite like. And it's the same stuff as you get in bath bombs. And it's in loads of stuff because it's a sort of slight preservative. So this is our silvery colour. And this is going to be really, really pale. And because it's really pale, it's absolute pain to get it evenly spread throughout the dye because there's just not that much dye there. And even though we've not put the citric acid on, the dye molecules do start making bonds with the wool almost immediately, particularly because our water is slightly acidic anyway. But we're getting there. So it's quite a good workout doing these to get the dye spread out really nice and evenly. But you'll notice we're only squeezing. We're not rubbing or doing anything else, and that's what keeps the fibre really nice to spin and work with. Right, let's have a quick look. I think that's going to be okay. So that's our silvery grey. So remember, all of these are going to get paler once they've been dyed, once they've been dried. But it's always amazing just how little dye you have to use to get these pastel colours. Ooh, mind the shelf. So normally with these, normally when I'm dyeing, I dye much bigger quantities. I usually work with dye lots of about 600 grams. And weirdly, although it's larger quantities become more challenging in terms of how you put them together, and sort of the space they take up, and so just handling that much fibre. Mixing the colours is actually much easier because you've got much more leeway. But yeah, so this is the purple colour going on next. So it's quite funny going back to just doing 100-gram quantities, because they are teeny tiny to work with in comparison to sort of the nice big dye lots I often work with. So you can see how we've just ended up with that lovely pinky mauvey colour. And the one thing I do know about using that fluorescent pink is it has a little bit of chroma. So probably as this dyes, the colour's just going to split ever so slightly and give us a slight two-tone effect. So there will be hints of the pinker sections sort of just showing through in some places. And I think that's going to look really pretty mixed in with this. So we're not going to end up with a completely sort of flat and even colour. There's going to be a little bit of variation. So that's the purple. And then the last two we've got is our kind of apricot shade and then our rich golden shade. So I basically squeeze out all the water till they are pretty much completely dry. So someone said to us, just soak in just plain water. And plain water, and I usually put a little bit of washing up liquid in it, and just to make sure there's no spinning grease or sort of dirt left lurking about. You will be amazed how dirty clean code wool top still is when you start having large quantities of it. That seems like it needs more water. But I don't use citric acid in my soap water because I like to be able to control when I put the citric acid on. And particularly for the those pale colours, if your fiber's already got citric acid in, you just can't get the dye moving around the fibre very well. So spread this out. So if the citric acid was already on this fibre, it's much harder to get a really nice even coverage. And if you put the citric acid in the soap water, you don't really know how much citric acid there is. And it can get very wasteful because generally, even though I reuse soap water, eventually it gets to the point where the water is so disgusting, or I'm going to be going away, or I'm going to be having a few days where I'm got other tasks to do. So and the citric acid sits there and it becomes really disgusting. And you end up basically pouring it away. And citric acid used to be really, really cheap. And it's one of the things that has risen in price really quite markedly. So I think a lot of it's made in China. So with the combination of the pound being weak and global shipping's all costing more. So big bulky things like citric acid just started costing more. So try to use what you need and no more. But yeah, so somebody said about the dye split, the dye splitting. I tend to use very few dyes which are mixture dyes. So nearly every single dye that is on here is what's known as an acid milling dye. And if anybody likes to know more about this in particular, last summer I wrote a self-paced fibre dyeing course that was specifically focused upon using acid dyes with fibre, because there's loads and loads and loads of information about using them with yarn, but very little out there that specifically focuses on fibre. And while some of the things are completely transferable, there's other bits and pieces that are very specific to working with this medium. So all the dyes that I have here are genuine acid milling dyes. I'll go and grab last of here. And one of the sections in the course is about getting to know your dyes. So I dye mostly with primaries, with a few secondaries and some neutrals thrown in. And from that, I mix up most colours. You will get some dye companies sell their acid dyes, and acid milling means that the dye molecule is that colour. So this orange dye, it is an orange dye molecule that's in there. It's not a mixture of red and yellow dyes. The brown that I use is a brown dye molecule. The black that I use is a black dye molecule. That means that when I come to use it, I know that it's going to give me the colour that I want without any concerns about it splitting. And also because I'm sort of the wet techniques, I'm space limited, and with the techniques that I use, most of the time I don't want colours splitting. There's various yarn dyeing techniques where those splitting effects could be really nice, but most of the time, if I'm using a brown, I want it to stay brown. I don't want it separating out into all the different primary colours. So I like my dyes to be the colour that they say they are, rather than, it wasn't quite 20, there we go, rather than be ones that are mixtures, because it can start to become really unwieldy. I mean, I've got 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I've got 15 dyes up here, and I kind of don't have space for having any more pre-mixed. So it starts to become very inefficient. If every time I want to use a colour, I've got to mix up the quantity that I need. So all of these are made up into what's called stock solutions. But I go through all of that detail in the course. So if you're interested in that, there is a link either in the description or it's also up in my profile. And one of the sections is purely based upon getting to know your dyes, mixing the colours together so you can really get a handle on what colour effects that you're going to get. With the aim being that you could approach a colour palette like the one we've just done today and go, this colour, this colour, this colour, this colour, this quantity, and end up with what you want, which is kind of the goal. So here's our colour palette. I'm going to put it into the same order as it is in the picture. Okay, so that is what we've mixed. Okay, the yellow is the one that I'm not sure about. It may be that it's too bright and too yellow. It needs to be a more muted one, but I'll find out once I've heat set it and let it dry, and we'll take a better look at it. But we've kind of got that sort of nice mixture of lights and darks. We've not got any colour that's kind of standing out at the moment as being too vibrant. They're all going to be quite nice and pastel. This apricot by itself is probably not my favouriteest colour, but within this context it works. It works in this colour palette of this lovely sunset over those reed beds. So this is now going to go into the oven to be heat set. People say, oh, how long for? And the answer is until it's done. It's a bit like the cookbook says it's going to take half an hour, but actually in your oven it might take a slightly different amount of time. But they'll be heated up until the dyes have made permanent bonds onto the fibre. It'll be rinsed, hung up to dry, divided up into packs, and it'll be in the shop on the 1st of September, because this is our September colourway. So it'll only be dyed throughout the month of September. Towards the back end of September, I shall put up the voting links for what we're going to dye in October. So that will be up in the Fellowship of Yarn, and again there's a link to get to it in the descriptions should you want to see more. And there'll also be so that's what we'll be voting on for October, and then back end of September there'll be a video at some point in time going up, and you can come back and watch me go through the whole process all over again. Thank you very much for coming and spending your Tuesday sort of post coffee pre-lunchtime time here in the UK, or whatever time it is in whatever part of the world you're in. The bits to rewatch it back, they stay live. Well, I've put them up so you can watch them back again if there's something you think, oh, I want to know more about that. If you want to know more about dyeing fibre, then the links to the fibre dyeing course are up and available in lots of different places. And I hope you all have a very enjoyable rest of your day.